And we're off. Tim Lange, North Prospect Gym versus Zack Beeman, Full Circle BJJ. A little bit of a tie-up here. These are two of the higher ranked individuals in the middleweight division. See, Zack gets a little bit of a trip. Immediately going for, looks like a head and arm. Looks like a go-go choke around the neck. Up, and that's it. Zack gets the early sub in the middleweight division. Next up, we have Gary Chaney of Cleveland Institute of BJJ versus Zack Beeman of Tackle Jiu Jitsu. Both these gyms are affiliated under Brasa, Caprito's affiliation, and both these men are pretty similar builds. A lot of muscle, potentially some grindy wrestling. Both these guys have a pretty sizable gas tank, especially for the amount of muscle that they have. You can see the pit today is a little small. This does get fixed later on. This was an attempt to try to keep everything self-contained, but especially with matches like this, you're going to want to have more space. Jack staying on top, good shoulder pressure. You'd have to think that initiating those takedowns early on also would at least give him a little bit of a head start on Gary. Gary here trying to turn into him, get some frames. Gary playing in a half guard, although I'm not sure if that is going to be the best thing in this scenario. What I'd like to see is maybe Gary try to wrestle up and get an underhook on the far side. Jack being slow and steady here. Good patience. Not desperate for the pass, but working his knee in, and that's the pass. Let's see if he wants to take a scarf hold or mount. Gary did a good job building up his base, but I feel like he just needed to cut the angle a little bit more. And again, maybe get an underhook to wrestle up. Jack now has one hook in for back. Gary very keen on Jack's hands position and arms, so he doesn't have to defend a choke, but Jack is slowly tightening that grip. Gary with great composure, though. You can tell he's not frustrated. He's just working his way through it, making sure that he's keeping his neck protected. Jack going for a body triangle, but Gary's just a little too stacked for Jack to lock it up. Or Jack's legs are too short, not sure which. Here we go. So Gary has broken the hooks, also almost went out of bounds into the secondary camera, but he did a good job. So he leaned back and he framed the one thigh of Jack to the mat so he can scoot his butt out and Jack wouldn't be able to pin his hips. As you can see, this is a very dynamic match. Gary now most likely feels a sense of urgency to get a takedown of his own. So you'll see this is more of a battle of head position and tie-ups. Good job by Jack switching side to side and getting that snap down and pulling Gary right into a side control. And then turns into a little bit of a back take. Gary trying to peel the foot off of him, of the hook that Jack does have. What I'd like to see is him shift his hips and kind of scoot himself over Jack's other knee to maybe free himself and get into a guard position. Jack not committing to the back take so that he can kind of ride. So you'll see Jack's been going from like a half side control to a back to a turtle position. And he has two of his hands basically underneath Gary's arms, so they're almost like underhooks. The arms that are around his head are for attacking, but when you have two underhooks, you're really just going for a control position. And Gary's really having a hard time getting past Jack's grip here. Now you see Jack has made a couple switches to go for a head and arm, or maybe just an arm bar straight up. But Jack's way more focused on control, which again isn't a bad thing. A little bit of a reset here. I think we're going to try to emulate that position. Jack going for a far side head and arm, but again, you can see that other arm right back to control, right? He wasn't dead set on rolling for a rear naked choke or going for like some sort of arm bar. He has that hand over Gary's shoulder, but he always goes back to the hip. We're getting a little short on time, however, and we would like to see a sub based on the point system for the league. As a reminder, submissions are 12 points, decision wins are only 4. Jack has him pretty pinned, doing a good job keeping his hips down. Gary was still able to keep his base and kind of turn in because Jack was a little high on Gary's back. You'll see when people are hipping in to that like rear turtle that's flattened out, if you're right in the center of the back, especially with the amount of weight and strength that Jack has, I don't think Gary would be able to turn in, but good job for Gary to kind of come back to that half guard position. Looking for a little bit of a lockdown, but at this point, you know, he's going to have to roll in for a heel hook or a knee bar. All right, time. That ended up being a unanimous decision for Jack, just based on control time overall. You know, I mean, even Jack had more, I guess what you'd call them, submission attempts. But again, Jack was much more focused on control, which isn't a bad way to be. You know, I think by almost any jiu-jitsu rule set, that would be a very dominant performance. So Jack moves on with 4 additional points in the TGGL, and we move on to our next match. Here we have Abdul versus Gary. Abdul Tackle Jiu Jitsu fame, going against Gary. Some time has passed in between these matches. We did a couple lightweight division matches in between to give Gary a break. But Abdul's getting ready to get right in there. So we start off. Abdul, a very different matchup for Gary than Jack. But Abdul is a very good wrestler in his own right, just not as short, stocky wrestler. Abdul conceding the takedown, but digging for a guillotine attempt, and you can see Abdul's kind of building up his base to maybe go for an armbar or maybe an omoplata setup. Even with the expanded mat space, we still have some space constraints, as is true with any jiu-jitsu competition. Gary hunkering down, Abdul trying to get some isolation on an arm. A little bit of a loose closed guard. You can see he is ready to open his legs up and dig in for a submission. He's just waiting for, I think, Gary to get into the right spot. Now Gary's going for a body lock pass. Well, maybe he's not. Yeah, he is. And you can see he actually has Abdul's arm trapped behind him. So if Abdul's not careful, he could get Kimura'd here. Fortunately for Abdul, he's pretty flexible. And Abdul's going for a Kimura of his own. But one thing that I would point out here is that Abdul has lost his full guard and is now in half guard to get a little bit of leverage to save himself from that Kimura. Both gentlemen now with no submission threat. And Abdul is locking up his guard, maybe going for that arm isolation again. There you go, Gary's looking to pass. He gets it. Gary doing a good job kind of keeping Abdul ajar. So when your hips and shoulders aren't in line in the same spot, it's hard to build a base up, a pressure, hip in, all of that. Abdul with pretty good guard retention, recovering his guard, digging for a guillotine, but Gary being pretty patient. Gary is actually executing a pretty similar game plan that Jack just did to Gary not too long ago. Abdul playing it very differently than Gary played it, though. Trying to get some head and arm attacks, trying to isolate the neck, trapped with that body lock again. Gary going right over with his knee, and I would venture to guess that he's going to put shoulder pressure on Abdul's face and then work to get that other leg out to go for another pass into side control. Good shoulder pressure. You can see he's trying to get that other leg free. His knee brace actually might be kind of hurting him a little bit here, but he's doing a good job keeping the chin of Abdul turned away. That way it's harder for Abdul to turn in, recover a full guard, or go for any kind of leg entanglements. Going for a little bit of a smother gas mask choke. Abdul doing good. He's staying active. He is not giving up on this. He's getting his guard back, going for a hip bump sweep, trying to build his base up. Gary's driving in. We got Adam resetting them in the middle. Got about 90 seconds left in this match. Gonna have to see Abdul go for some pretty aggressive submission. Looks like there's a little bit of discussion as to how deep that guillotine might have been. I think Abdul just has his hand to the side though. Yeah. What I'd like to see Abdul do is kind of turn to the side to maybe threaten a little bit of a triangle in hopes to maybe fail from a triangle into an armbar or just a straight up escape. One thing that Abdul's pretty good at is wrestle ups, and Gary's body lock passing has kind of neutralized that, and his shoulder pressure and keeping Abdul facing away from him while he's on bottom has really hindered his ability to get up. But here's a situation where Abdul can get up. His legs are free. He's no longer in that body lock pass. He's framing. Looks like he was digging for a leg there a little bit. He has his knee shield in. Good pressure. It looks like he's trying to avoid Gary closing that distance again. Going for a triangle. Look at this. Pulling on the head. Needs to lock it up though. What Abdul needs to do here, and Gary's arm is in the way, but Abdul needs to cut the angle and lock his feet up and then squeeze his thighs together and pull the head down. With just the leg there, I don't know that this is enough of a threat to sway the judges based on the first 5 minutes of this round. Yeah, and then he lost the triangle attempt. Gary goes right back to that body lock. Does not want to get there again. Going for that same passing sequence we've seen several times this round. Abdul getting his frames up. Looks like Gary might be going for, oh yeah, there it is, a straight ankle attempt. That straight ankle attempt right at the buzzer probably, well, I can tell you definitely won Gary this round. So all three judges ended up going in favor of Gary. Good job. And now we're here with Tim versus Abdul. Both these gentlemen coming off of hard-fought battles, looking to get a W for week 1 of TGGL. That was a slick duck under from Tim Lange. Abdul pretty much staying on top, but now getting his back taken. Good job by Tim, immediately getting that body lock and moving kind of side to side on bottom. So when Abdul was starting to defend the back take, he was able to slink him off to the other side and get a body lock. You can see Abdul doing some hip switching, trying to beat that body lock while Tim digs in for the submission. And he is hunting for it. You see Tim has good control over Abdul's arm. He also has his forearm over Abdul's face. In those situations, I'd like to see maybe a palm-to-palm attack on the rear naked instead of the more traditional handed bicep. Maybe he's going for a short choke there. His feet are actually dangerously close to being crossed in between Abdul's legs, but Tim doing a good job using his length to get back to that body triangle. A little bit of arm pummeling action here. Abdul trying to slip out and get his hips free, but needs to address that body triangle from Lange. Elbows down. There we go. There we go. Up. And so Abdul now has grabbed Tim's leg. Tim's now switching to a palm to palm and gets his body triangle back. Tim riding a little high. Abdul might be able to get out of this with a tripoding maneuver, or looks like Tim slipped off the side. Tim now attacking a triangle. Abdul gets out. Good scramble. That was non-stop action. Abdul gets a takedown. Well, I guess Tim might have been pulling in for that guillotine at the same time. Abdul working to get his middle leg out and get to the side to neutralize the choke attempt. Goes into full mount. He's got to really arch his neck here so that Tim didn't get it. A little dangerous maneuver by Abdul, but he's on top now. Looks like Abdul's going for a back take of his own. Going in for the head and arm. Tim trying to straighten his arm out to create a little bit of pressure, and now he's got 2-on-1. Really back and forth match so far. You see Tim looking for that sit out. Abdul just trying to stay into this back take side control. Tim digging for a heel hook. Abdul never had his hips trapped, so he's able to spin out of it. Abdul going for a leg lock of his own. And it was a straight ankle. Great job, Abdul. Come from behind victory a little bit there. Although it was pretty back and forth. But Tim's early onslaught of triangles, intense, man. Now we have Zack Beeman versus Zack Beappler, the match I was most excited to see tonight in the middleweight division. They run right into it. You see Jack is super aggressive, pulls back for a straight ankle. Now Zack is a tough guy, hard to submit all around. Immediately falls back for his guard of his own. Maybe doesn't want to deal with Jack's wrestling intensity, wants to conserve energy. Good butterfly hooks. We have not seen a great deal of butterfly guard tonight. Zack looking for an arm. Yeah, you can see he's pulling the arm down, and then he gets Jack over with that butterfly hook. Looks like he's going for a pass. Ooh. Immediately spins for this triangle. Such a beautiful maneuver that is in such a bad spot in the gym where none of the cameras are really getting this. But Jack's defending this armbar, just trying to move around. Yeah, Jack's arm is in serious danger here. Zack has now gotten a triangle, or basically a reverse triangle from back. Digging in for that arm. What will Jack do? Jack deadlifts Zack right up. Zack loves the carnival ride. Zack having the time of his life. Thank you, Jack, for bringing this back to the center. But the problem here is that Jack is now carrying all of Zack's weight. Zack is not a small middleweight. And he's still kind of locked up in that triangle. You can see Zack kind of in love with the novelty of it all. Digging for that arm. Yep, there it is. Yeah, the problem with that is Jack was in danger the minute he stood up, and it was just up to Zack for when he wanted to spin for that armbar. Beautiful job. Wonderful day. Tough division. Here's where our rankings are. Zack 24 points, Abdul 12 points, Jack 4 points. They will advance into next week. We have several more middleweights joining the fray, but here's your leaderboard, and I'm really excited to see where this goes.